Sometimes loneliness can feel like a punishment. But what if God didn't abandon you? What if He's operating on you right now? This is the story of a woman who could never heal without losing everything, who maybe didn't even think she deserved to heal. A 72-year-old woman in a small town in Georgia. Margaret gave her whole life and never once thought about receiving. Every Sunday, she'd stand in the kitchen of the little church on Oak Street in Gracewater and cook for others. If someone got sick, Margaret would bring soup, even if the handle of the pot burned her hand. If someone was crying, Margaret would sit right down beside them. If someone needed money, Margaret wouldn't think twice before reaching into her own pocket. 72 years old, white-haired, hands full of wrinkles, and a heart that never learned how to say no, because Margaret carried a secret no one knew about. The neighbors didn't know. The congregation didn't know. Her own children didn't even know, maybe because they never asked. As a little girl, Margaret grew up in a house where love came with conditions. Her father was a harsh man who never learned how to show affection. Instead, what he gave his daughter were words that carved into her soul like scars, and Margaret took away one single lesson from that. If you're useful, you're loved. If you give, you have worth. So she gave. Her whole life, she married Walter, a quiet man wrestling with his own inner demons. The marriage was nothing, like Margaret had hoped. Maybe no marriage is enough to fix two broken people. For 30 years, she carried a burden no single person should ever have to carry alone. Without her shoulders caving in, gritting her teeth, she smiled on the outside. She fell apart on the inside. God is testing me, she'd tell herself for comfort. I have to be strong. Walter passed from this world exactly 8 years ago, leaving behind an unfilled silence. Margaret didn't cry. She had forgotten how to cry from grief. She had raised 3 children on her own, Kevin, Diane, and little Sarah. All 3 now lived far away, at distances Margaret couldn't reach. Kevin was in Atlanta, called once a year, and that was mostly when he needed money. His voice grew more distant every time. Diane sent a message one day. Margaret read it, over and over, until the letters blurred. Mom, you're suffocating me. I need distance. Please don't call again. A message of just a few sentences, short enough to destroy a lifetime. And the youngest, Sarah, Margaret's favorite, Sarah, only needed her mother now when she wanted advice. She never asked, Mom, how are you really doing? Margaret still prayed every day, even when her voice trembled, but never for herself. Lord, heal Mrs. Patterson. Lord, help young Derek find a job. Lord, protect my children. She never said this. She even refused to form the words, Lord, heal me. Not once. Then came the fall that changed everything. As the leaves were dropping, Kevin asked for money for a business. Margaret sent her last savings. She slipped a little note inside the envelope. I love you. He didn't even say thank you. Diane called Margaret with that commanding tone of hers and told her to sell the house and move in with her, but as a babysitter. You're alone anyway, Mom. What do you need a house for? When Margaret hesitated, Diane got angry. Even that brief silence was unbearable. You've always been selfish. Then she hung up. Margaret stood there leaning against the wall, phone still in her hand. And the neighbors? Mrs. Patterson, whom Margaret had cooked for over 15 years, complained the casserole was too salty. Derek, whom she'd lent money to, suddenly started avoiding her. The women in the Bible study group stopped inviting her, as if Margaret had never sat at that table. 2 months of nothing but silence, the kind that seeps into the walls. No calls, no knocks on the door, nobody. For the first time in 72 years, Margaret was completely alone. She didn't even have anyone left to say her name out loud, and the silence wounded her deeply, psychologically. With nothing to distract her, everything she had buried deep for 50 years came rising back to the surface. Childhood, marriage, her children's indifference, all of it at once, piling on, not letting her breathe. She sat in her empty kitchen and stared deep into the walls. It must have been around 3 in the morning one night. Even the hum of the refrigerator had gone silent, and she couldn't take it anymore. God, she whispered into the silence. Why did you take everyone from me? Wasn't I good enough? Didn't I give enough? And then, for the first time in her life, that woman who had gritted her teeth for 72 years, Margaret let go. Not for Walter, not for her children, not for the neighbors, just for herself, maybe for the first time ever. She let the tears come, tears she'd been holding back for decades, aged beneath her eyes. For the childhood taken from her, the games never played, and the arms that never held her. For the marriage she carried, the marriage where she bore a two-person load on one shoulder. For the childhood taken from her, the games never played, and the arms that never held her. For the marriage she carried, the marriage where she bore a two-person load on one shoulder. She cried until her eyes ran dry. And then, right in the middle of that emptiness, a thought. Quiet, but clear as morning light. You never showed me your own wounds. You were so busy feeding others, always putting your own plate last. I had to remove them all from your life so you would finally stop, so you would finally let me reach your deepest wounds. Margaret trembled, from her shoulders to her fingertips. Was this the voice of God, or her own mind? It didn't matter. It was the truth. The next morning, eyes swollen, but with a strange lightness inside, Margaret did something she had never done before. She knelt beside her bed and prayed for herself. God, heal me. Not others. Me. Heal the broken girl underneath the strong woman I've been playing all these years. It was the hardest prayer of her life. Her voice cracked 3 times before she could finish the sentence. But each time she started over. The weeks that followed were dark. The kind of dark where you can't even muster the strength to open the curtains. Margaret didn't go to church. She didn't help anyone. For the first time in her life, she didn't ask a single person, "Are you okay?" She stayed home, alone within 4 walls with herself, and let everything she had suppressed for so long finally come. She prayed over every memory, every scar, one by one. God, heal this. Psychologists call this process delayed grief. People continuing to function for decades without ever processing what they carry. Research shows that nearly 1 in 3 people only consciously experience their deepest wounds in old age. Margaret was one of them. Slowly, week by week, things began to change. The weight of the past turned into mourning. Mourning turned into forgiveness. And forgiveness turned into something Margaret had never felt before in her life. Peace. Real peace. She understood, but no longer with anger. Not even with pain anymore. Her father had never learned how to love either. Walter had been broken in his own battles. Her children had never learned how to give, because all they ever did was take. None of it was her fault. 3 months later, Margaret opened her front door, squinted as the sun hit her face, and stepped outside. The air smelled like freshly cut grass. How many times had she smelled that before, but never felt it like this? The world looked different. Not because the world had changed, but because Margaret had. She went back to the church on Oak Street, her feet hesitating for a moment on the familiar stone steps. This time she sat in the very back row, not to hide, but to quietly exist. Pastor Whitfield noticed her and smiled. After the service, he walked over to her. His steps were slow, as if careful not to intrude. "Margaret, we missed you." His voice was warm, but underneath it there seemed to be a question. Margaret smiled, her lips parting with a tremble, her first real smile in months. "I was sick, Pastor, but God healed me." In the months that followed, Margaret's life was different. Like a baby looking at the same world with brand new eyes, she still helped, but no longer to be loved. She still gave, but no longer everything she had. For the first time, she learned a word she couldn't say for 70 years. That one word, knotted in her throat for 72 years. "No," Diane called one day. When the phone rang, Margaret put her hand on her chest first, crying. "Mom, I'm sorry." Her voice was breaking, like a little child's voice. Margaret forgave her, but then she said something she never could have said before, repeating every word to herself first, as if she'd been rehearsing it for years. Diane, I love you, but I'm not going to destroy myself to save you anymore. That's not my job. That's God's job. Silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence where you could hear someone swallow, then a soft cry. Maybe it was the beginning of Diane's own healing, feeling something for the first time beyond the fear of losing her mother. One evening, Margaret was sitting in her garden, a blanket on her knees, a warm cup of tea in her hands. The stars over Gracewater were shining as if someone had just polished them. She was alone. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't lonely. She was full. With God. With peace. With herself. God, she whispered, thank you for pulling everyone away. That was the only way I could finally let you reach my deepest wounds. Because here's the truth Margaret learned. Sometimes God removes everyone from your life, clears the table one by one, not to punish you, but to heal you. The loneliness you fear is actually God's operating room, with its white lights, cold air, and ruthless clarity. No masks, nothing to distract you, just you and Him. Maybe you're in exactly that place right now. Everyone's gone. The silence is unbearable. It's ringing in your ears, and you're asking desperately, why, God? What if this silence isn't a punishment, but an invitation? Let Him work. Let yourself heal. You are not forgotten, not for a single moment. Right now, you are being operated on by the most compassionate hands that don't look compassionate. If this story touched your heart, send it to someone going through the silence. Have you ever experienced God using loneliness to heal you? See you in the next story. And until then, remember, that silence that looks like your enemy, it's not actually your enemy. It's God's healing room.